r/NoSleep. My mother forced me to play Catch the Shadows every night at 9. One night, the shadows caught me. It started innocently, or so I thought. My mother introduced the game, Catch the Shadows, when I was 9. Every night, like clockwork, she'd insist we go to the meadow behind our house just as the moonlight stretched over the tall grass. At first, I thought it was just another quirky family tradition, like singing songs on rainy days or eating dessert before dinner on Sundays. But my mother's tone whenever she explained the rules told me otherwise. 9 sharp, Clara. You run when I tell you, and you stop when I say. If you see anything at all, moving in the shadows, don't look at it too long. Just hide, and don't come out until I find you. Understand? I nodded, unsure of what she meant by shadows moving. That first night, I ran because she told me to, stumbling through the cool grass. I found a spot near the old oak tree, crouched low, and waited. When she finally found me after what felt like hours, her face was pale but relieved. "Good," she said, helping me up. "You stayed hidden. That's important." At first, I didn't question it. We were alone, my father wasn't in the picture, and maybe this was just her way of bonding. The meadow was peaceful at night, and I didn't mind the running. But as the weeks went on, her behavior started to change. She became jittery during the day, constantly looking out the window, her fingers tapping nervously on the kitchen counter. "The shadows are clever," she whispered once as we prepared for the night's game. "They'll try to trick you. They'll whisper your name or make noises to draw you out. Don't listen. Don't move." Her words sent a shiver down my spine, but I nodded. It was just a game, right? One night, I saw it. I was crouched low in the brush, my heart pounding in my ears. The moonlight cast long, eerie shadows across the meadow, and everything was still. Too still. That's when I noticed the movement, a ripple in the dark shapes cast by the trees. At first, I thought it was the wind, but then I saw it again. A figure, tall, thin, and impossibly dark, emerged from the shadow of the oak tree. It didn't walk so much as glide, its limbs stretching unnaturally as it moved. My breath caught in my throat. "Clara," a voice called, soft and melodic. "Come out, sweetheart. I see you." It sounded like my mother, but it couldn't be her. She never called me during the game. "Clara, it's okay. The game's over. Come on out." I squeezed my eyes shut and pressed my back against the tree. My mother's words from earlier echoed in my mind, "Don't listen. Don't move." Minutes felt like hours. The voice kept calling, its tone growing more insistent. Then it changed. It became deeper, raspier, almost like a growl. "Clara," it snarled. "You can't hide forever." I bit my lip to keep from screaming. The figure passed by my hiding spot, and I felt the air grow cold. My body was trembling, every instinct screaming at me to run, but I stayed still. I stayed quiet. Eventually, the voice faded, and the figure disappeared into the trees. When my mother finally found me, I collapsed into her arms, sobbing. "What was that?" I asked when we got back home, my voice shaking. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow. "The shadows don't like to lose," she said. "But you listened. You stayed hidden. That's what matters." She refused to explain further, and I didn't press her. But from that night on, the game felt different. It wasn't fun anymore. It was survival. The night it all changed, my mother woke me up early, around 8. "We're starting early tonight," she said, her voice tight. "Go. Hide." "Why?" I asked groggily. "What's going on?" She didn't answer, just shoved me toward the back door. I ran, adrenaline already pumping, and found my usual hiding spot by the oak tree. This time, I didn't just hear one voice calling my name. There were many, dozens, all overlapping, some gentle, some harsh, some whispering things I didn't understand. The shadows seemed alive, shifting and writhing like a sea of black tendrils. And then I saw her. My mother, standing in the middle of the meadow, surrounded by the shadows. She wasn't running or hiding. She was staring at them, her face set in grim determination. "Clara, stay where you are," she screamed. The shadows surged toward her, and she disappeared into their mass. I wanted to run to her, to help, but her words held me in place. I stayed hidden, trembling and crying, as the shadows consumed her. When dawn broke, the meadow was empty. My mother was gone. I walked back to the house, hoping, praying, that she'd be there, but she wasn't. Her things were still in the kitchen, her favorite mug on the counter, but there was no sign of her. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. Days turned into weeks, and eventually, I stopped expecting her to come back. But every night at 9, I heard her voice calling from the meadow. "Clara," she whispers. "Come out." And every night, I close my eyes and stay hidden, just like she taught me. But one night, I couldn't ignore it anymore. It had been a year since my mother vanished, and I had become a shell of the child I once was. Sleep was rare, and the memories of the shadows haunted me in every quiet moment. Despite my fear, I felt a gnawing pull to understand, to find out what had truly happened that night. The whispers had grown louder over the months. At first, they came only at night, starting at 9 sharp, like clockwork. But recently, they'd begun to seep into the daytime. I'd hear faint echoes of my name as I walked through the house or rustling sounds when I ventured too close to the meadow. Something was growing restless. One night, I made a decision. I had to go back. I had to face whatever it was. At exactly 8:45, I packed a flashlight, a small kitchen knife, and my mother's old locket. I didn't know why I took the locket, it just felt right. The cool metal pressed against my palm gave me a strange sense of comfort. I stepped into the meadow just as the last light of day disappeared over the horizon. The air was unnaturally cold, and the once familiar surroundings felt foreign, as though the meadow itself had shifted in my absence. The oak tree loomed ahead, its branches skeletal against the pale moonlight. As I walked closer, I felt the weight of the shadows pressing against me. The whispers started, soft at first, like a breeze carrying distant voices. But with each step, they grew louder, more distinct. "Clara. Come closer. Stay." I reached the oak tree and stood beneath its sprawling canopy. The whispers were deafening now, swirling around me like a living thing. My flashlight flickered, casting erratic beams of light that seemed to catch on shapes just outside my vision. "Where are you?" I whispered, clutching the locket tightly. The air grew heavier, almost suffocating, and the shadows began to shift. Slowly, they pulled together in front of me, coalescing into a figure. It was tall and impossibly thin, its form flickering like smoke in the wind. Its face, or what should have been its face, was a void, an absence that seemed to draw in all light. It didn't speak, but I felt its voice in my mind. "You broke the rules." My knees buckled, and I fell to the ground. "What are you?" I managed to choke out. The figure tilted its head, almost curiously. "A guardian," it said. "A collector. Your mother knew the rules, and so do you." "What rules?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "What did you do to her?" "She played the game," it said. "And she lost." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My mother hadn't been protecting me, she had been stalling, bargaining. She'd been playing the game for as long as she could, keeping the shadows at bay. But eventually, her time had run out. The figure stepped closer, and the shadows around it writhed like living things. "It is your turn now, Clara." "No," I said, forcing myself to stand. My legs felt like jelly, but I refused to back down. "I won't play." The figure paused, as though considering my defiance. Then it raised an elongated hand, and the whispers grew into a roar. The shadows surged forward, wrapping around my ankles, pulling me down. I screamed, slashing wildly with the knife, but it passed through the darkness as if it were air. "Run," the figure said, its voice like thunder in my mind. "Or stay. It does not matter. You will lose." Desperation took over. I tore the locket from my neck and hurled it at the figure. The small, silver object struck its chest, and for a moment, the shadows recoiled, hissing like steam against hot metal. The figure staggered, its form flickering wildly. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I turned and ran, my flashlight bouncing wildly in the dark. The meadow seemed endless, the trees shifting and twisting, blocking my path. The whispers followed me, now a cacophony of anger and hunger. "Clara. Stay. You cannot escape." Somehow, I made it back to the house. Slamming the door shut, I bolted it and collapsed against the wall, gasping for breath. The whispers were still there, faint now, pressing against the windows and walls like a storm. But they didn't come inside. I sat there for hours, clutching the knife, waiting for the whispers to fade. When they finally did, I dared to move. My mother's locket was lying on the floor by the window, untouched. I picked it up, holding it close. It felt warm, almost alive. That night, I didn't sleep. I knew the game wasn't over. The next day, I went through my mother's belongings, searching for anything that could help me understand. In an old shoebox buried in her closet, I found a journal. Most of it was filled with mundane entries, shopping lists, notes about her day, but toward the back, the handwriting became frantic. The shadows are growing stronger. They demand more time, more sacrifice. I can't protect her forever. I've bargained for years, but they're impatient. They want Clara. If you're reading this, Clara, I'm sorry. I've done everything I could. Stay hidden. Stay safe. The final entry was smeared, almost illegible. The locket is the key. It binds them, but only for a time. Be brave, my love. I didn't fully understand what she meant, but I knew one thing: the shadows weren't going to stop. They had taken my mother, and now they wanted me. But I wasn't going to play by their rules anymore. That night, at 9 sharp, I stepped into the meadow again. This time, I wasn't running. This time, I was ready. The shadows rose to greet me, their whispers like 1,000 knives scraping against my mind. The figure appeared again, its form more solid, more menacing. "Back so soon?" it said, its voice dripping with malice. I held up the locket. "You want me? Come and get me." The shadows surged forward, but this time, I didn't run. I stood my ground, clutching the locket as it burned hot in my hand. The silver glowed brightly, and the shadows recoiled, screaming. The figure lunged at me, but the light from the locket flared, and it staggered back, its form unraveling. "You cannot win," it growled, its voice fading. "The game never ends." "Maybe not," I said, stepping forward. "But neither do I." The figure dissolved into the darkness, and the meadow fell silent. For the first time in a year, the whispers were gone. I don't know if they'll come back. Maybe they're waiting, watching. But for now, I keep the locket close and the rules in mind. And every night, at 9 sharp, I go to the meadow. Not to run, but to stand. To remind them, I'm not afraid anymore.